Привет всем, с вами я, Jenny, that crazy American lady who took a childhood fascination with this fairy tale and turned it into a lifetime of learning, teaching, and loving the Russian language. And as a non-native, I can understand your brain, and I understand your pain. This is how Jenny learned Russian. We all have those moments when we're learning a language that we have like an epiphany, an aha moment, as we like to say in English, or a light bulb moment. So in this video, we're going to talk about 15 of my light bulb moments, either about the pronunciation of the Russian language, the grammar of the Russian language, or Russian culture in general. So let's go ahead and get started. I hope at the end of this video, you'll share some of your examples of your light bulb moments in Russian and share them with us so that we can all kind of learn from each other. So my number one has to do with pronunciation. And this blew my mind in my Russian phonetics and phonology class when I was doing my bachelor's degree, where I learned that palatalization is not just when you see mягкий знак. It's actually, it affects any nouns or any vowels that are considered soft. And we know when a vowel is soft based on the following vowel. In fact, I have a whole video about it right up here. I'll link to it. You can watch it later. But that means, yes, we say if we have a mягкий знак on the end of an L, sure, we're going to say жаль. But guess what? Something in a word like были is also palatalized. So that L, because it's right before the vowel E, is also palatalized. Были, были, были. Crazy, right? Okay, so then my number two light bulb moment was when, and this is like seriously a huge deal, and I think it majorly affects pronunciation, and it affects the way Russians have a strong Russian accent when they speak English as well. So in Russian, the letters T, D, S, and N are dentals, okay? So in English, these are alveopalatals, meaning they are produced when the tip of your tongue is put up on the bumpy part that's just behind your teeth. Well, in Russian, they're dentals, meaning the tip of your tongue should be against the back of your teeth. So you would say something like нет, нет, нет. Something like, I can't think of any more, but нет, сто, right? So these are dentals. Your tongue should be at the back of your teeth. In the same way that when Russians speak English with a strong accent, they would say something like, I not want, right? They're putting their tongue in the wrong place. They need to move it back to the bumpy part behind their teeth. So that's called an alveolar palatal is what that's called. So that was a huge light bulb moment for me. And now to this day, when I speak Russian, I try and have M, my tip of my tongue on the back of my teeth, T, D, S, right? So those are dentals in Russian. Okay, хорошо. Номер три. This one was huge. Okay, so this was my first, so my epiphany here is how to say I'm full. How to signal to the Russians in your life to please stop feeding me. Please stop feeding me. Okay. And I actually have another light bulb moment about this later on in the list. So this tells you how much of a struggle this was for me in Russia. So my first semester, I lived with a babushka. And of course, as you know, babushka, that's their full-time job, is making sure everyone around them is eating massive amounts of food at all time. So I kept trying to tell her I'm full because I used the dictionary and I looked up I'm full and it said, я полная, right? And so I would say that to her to try and say, I don't want any more food. And she'd say, да ладно, не полная, ешь, which means you're not fat, because the word полная means fat. And so she kept saying, I was saying, I'm fat. I don't want any more. I don't want any more. And she was like, you're not fat. You need to have more. So when I learned this phrase, it was revolutionary for me. Наелась. Я наелась. Right? A boy would say, я наелся, вы наелись, etc. So this comes from the verb наесться, which means to like be satisfied, to eat into the point that you're satisfied. So once I learned how to tell people, нет, спасибо, я наелась. О, вот. Просто чудо. Okay, хорошо. Номер четыре. And in fact, this is pertaining to the same tip, right? How to have them stop feeding you. So I was like, how are Russian girls so skinny? Because I swear, my hosts and my friends are always trying to feed me, feed me, feed me, feed me. And one time I looked at my friend Katya and I saw like Babushka kept putting more and more food on her plate. And I saw that she just kind of stirred it around. She didn't actually eat it. So she made it look like she was eating it, but wasn't actually eating it. And the big key is you should not clear your plate, because the second they see an empty plate, they're going to give you more food. So what you do is you just kind of stir that food around, and you never have an empty plate. Otherwise, they will give you more food. Number 5, epiphany moment. This again pertains to pronunciation, yes, but also just communicating, which is actually, if you don't do this correctly, it's very difficult. And also this is what my thesis was on. So intonation. Oh my gosh. Do you know if you don't use the correct intonation, they don't know that you're asking a question, right? Or worse yet, if you use English, American English intonation, and you go up on the end of a sentence, like "У вас есть книги?" right? And that's how an English question sounds. To Russian, that sounds like you're not done speaking. So they're just going to sit and they're going to stare at you and they're going to wait. Okay, so I remember being so frustrated by this when I lived in Russia, of like, I would ask a question, "У вас есть книги?" And they would just stare at me and stare at me and stare at me. And I'd have to add to the end of these questions, "Это вопрос," which means that's a question, right? So once I learned how to correctly use intonation, это Саша пришел. Саша пришел. Вот, Саша пришел ко мне, right? All these different ways to use your intonation to strategically emphasize what it is you're asking about. That was very revolutionary for me. And it's an aspect of the language that should not be neglected. And by the way, it improves your accent if you're using intonation correctly. Also, what's weird in Russian is when you're asking a question with a question word, this is called ika dva, or intonation construction number 2. This is so weird for the English-speaking brain. You actually should go down in your intonation. So you'd say, "Кто пришел?" Who arrived, right? So in English, it'd be like, who arrived? And we have this like nice little perky up on the end of the intonation. Nope. Кто пришел? Что вы хотите? Right? So they're saying, doesn't that sound so rude and weird to the English ear? But that's how you ask a question in Russian with a question word, is it's a downward intonation. Что вы хотите? Как вам помочь? Как вас зовут? You see, isn't that crazy? It's like super counterintuitive for the English-speaking brain. Okay, light bulb moment number 6. Again, maybe for some of you, this is like duh, and you're gonna think I'm so stupid. But I remember when I was learning about verbal aspect, my mind was blown that you cannot use a perfective verb in the present tense. So there is never a scenario in which you would have this kind of conversation. Привет, что ты сделаешь? Nope, you would never ask your friend, Привет, что ты сделаешь? Like, what are you doing? No, that means, what are you going to get done tomorrow? Which is super weird and super naggy, because there's no present tense if you're using the perfective. The perfective only cares about past or future. You either got it done or you will get it done. So I have many videos, and in fact, I'll link to them like somewhere around here, about verbal aspect. And those are like, I had a lot of light bulb moments about verbal aspect. Okay, next one, number 7. This is, you know how Russian word stress is really annoying and you can't predict it? And like Polish, for example, super easy. The word stress is always on the second to last syllable. That's super easy. Well, in Russian, it's very rare that you can predict the stress of anything. But there actually is a way to predict the word stress in conjugations. There's only 3 types of conjugation word stress. And it's either, I'm going to make a nice little chart for them here. It's either on the final syllable the whole way through, on the stem, meaning the main part of the verb, the whole way through. So you would say something like, Я вижу, ты видишь, он видит, мы видим, вы видите, они видят, right? Or we have everything is on the final syllable. Я звоню, ты звонишь, он звонит, мы звоним, вы звоните, они звонят, right? That's the whole way through. Or you have this. where it's on the final syllable in the ya conjugation, and then everything goes backwards. Я могу, ты можешь, он может, мы можем, вы можете, они могут. By the way, in Russian, did you know it's like kind of a stigma if you're a native Russian and you say они могут, right? You're considered kind of white trash and uneducated if you put the stress wrong on that word. So if you know this rule about how verb conjugation stress goes, you'll never have to make that mistake. So вот такие пирожки. Вот, следующий, номер 8. So this is how to use the word da as an intensifier, okay? So there's a lot of these little words in Russian, maybe I'll do a video about it sometime, where they're just kind of like little things that really affect the meaning of something. So for example, da, I, je, right? These kind of things that like add some attitude to what you're saying. So da can kind of intensify. So I remember when I finally learned how to use the phrase da ladna, and notice the intonation there, because if you say da ladna, it doesn't quite sound the same. You got to use the same intonation. So like da ladna, like yeah right. Oh come on, yes seriously, yeah right. Like you don't think he's cute. I saw you staring at him. Da ladna, right? Or to intensify, listen to, do you know how to say of course not? A lot of people might think it's конечно нет. No, you intensify the word нет by putting a da in front of it. Да нет. And notice how we have to only say the da for just a second. Да нет, very like that strong intonation. Да нет, okay? What if somebody is denying that they knew that it was your birthday? Oh, so let's say this is your spouse, and they're denying that it's your birthday. And you want to be like, yeah, right, you knew. Да ладно, да знаешь, да знаешь. Like, right? Oh, come on, you know, right? Да сказал, да знаю, да, what? So it kind of adds in a little sassiness into what you're trying to say. But notice you don't say the word da for very long, and it needs to have the correct intonation. Да нет, да ладно, да знаю, right? Like, so that kind of adds in a little sass into what you're saying. Okay, номер 9. Okay, so in previous videos, we've talked about gender and any word ending in mягкий знак and how that's kind of difficult. And, you know, a lot of times, even at the advanced level, you'll encounter a word that you can't figure out what the original gender of it was. Well, the good news is you can always look at surrounding words. So if it's just in the nominative case, you could look at the adjectives or the possessives in front of it. So for example, I remember the way I memorized that площадь is a feminine is memorizing the phrase красная площадь. Another one is you can look at how it declines, right? So again, this is for more of the advanced speakers when you get more tricky words like речь or суть or you know, things you're just not very familiar with, look at the way it declines. So if we know, for example, masculines ending in a mягкий знак, when they go into instrumental, they're going to get a yem ending or a yom ending. So конь, с конем, right? Versus if it's a feminine, it's going to get a u ending in the instrumental. So you would say something like с любовью, right? So if we see a U ending in instrumental, we know it was originally a feminine. Okay, номер 10. So going, just saying the word going is horrible. Saying the word went is even more horrible. In fact, I'm still to this day humiliated by a Facebook post I put on in the public for the whole world to see, in which I said, я шла на концерт вчера. Okay, I'm very ashamed of this. I'm admitting to this. I'm coming to you in this moment of vulnerability as a way to illustrate that we've all made this mistake. You really do not ever say the unidirectional going, идти ехать, in past tense. You just really don't. You don't say я шел, я шла, я ехал, я ехала. And let me tell you why. And in fact, I have a video about it. I'll link to it up here. That comes across as saying, I was going. And see how that sounds weird in English? I was going to a concert yesterday, right? And your audience is going to go, and, right? So I should have said, я ходила на концерт. I went there and I came back. So epiphany number 10 is you really don't say ехал, ехала, ехали, шел, шла, шли in past tense very often, unless you were going somewhere when such and such happened, when our tire went flat, when it started to rain, etc. And again, I have a whole video about that I'll link to right up here, so you can find out more about how to use those verbs of motion in past tense. Номер 11. Oh, this is revolutionary. Okay, so how to correctly use the word li. This is very advanced, and I think I have a whole video of it. I'll link to it up here, where I help my student Eli make sense of it, okay? So li, students often confuse li and yesli, but I'm gonna mainly talk about the main epiphany that I had was how to use li to get clarification, right? So if you can't use your intonation correctly, you can't make that really strong jump in intonation, like Sasha ко мне пришел. Sasha ко мне пришел. Sasha ко мне пришел, right? If you can't quite do it, you can actually use the word li and put it after the thing you're asking about. Пушкин ли написал стихотворение «Я помню чудное мгновение», right? So you're still going to need to use intonation, but the li, if you can strategically use that, you can create questions by putting li after the thing you're asking about. The default, by the way, the default position of that should be after the verb, but you can move it around depending on what's the thing you need clarification on. And again, I have a whole video about it. It's up here. Okay, номер 12. Okay, this made me really happy when I learned about this. So I'm sure you're all familiar with vowel reductions. O reduces to a, etc. The vowel reduction that made me the most happy, yes, I'm a nerd. I have like a ranking of my favorite vowel reductions. My favorite vowel reduction is the fact that y reduces to e in a pre-stress position. This is great because you think of so many words that you were saying and like they were unnecessarily difficult to pronounce. So for example, this word, rika, re. Okay, so I remember being like re, like that was really hard for me to go from an r into a y, re. Now when I found out that an unstressed y is just pronounced like an E. Oh my gosh, way easier to say. Rika, super easy. Anybody can say that, right? Same thing with like путешествовать. There's no путешествовать, right? Путешествовать. Now the шесть, that one's stressed, so that one does sound like a Y, but the путе, that one gets reduced to an E. Again, made my life a lot easier. Okay. I still struggle with this letter, okay? So even though I know how it's supposed to be pronounced, I can't always make my mouth do it, okay? So my light bulb moment number 13 is with this dreaded letter for us English speakers, right? Okay? So, and especially making the distinction between sh and sh. Okay, light bulb moment came when I realized that the vowels after sh are going to get a small Y sound in front of them, okay? So a word like pike, shiuka, you really should be pronouncing it as like a shiuka, okay? So, and that helps you make the distinction, right? Shutka, which is like a joke, shutka versus shiuka. Oh my gosh. Again, like I still need to train my tongue to actually do it because I've gotten very lazy over the years. But when I realized that like a sh is always soft, therefore making the following vowel have a y sound in front of it. Shiuka, shi. What else? Other ones. Anyway, so huge epiphany for me. Номер 4. This is more a cultural thing that I've learned. And it's this phrase and this concept called громко сказано. Это громко сказано. So something you need to know about Russians is that they will always downplay their ability. They will always downplay their knowledge versus, a lot of Americans would like to be, I'm the best. O'Doyle rules. Props to you if you know what that's from. Always Americans are always like, yeah, bleh, right, about themselves. In Russia, this is a big no-no. This is, you don't want to do something громко сказано. In fact, a funny little story. I remember we hired a taxi to take us from St. Petersburg to the Peterhof. And our taxi driver shows up and, I'm just like talking with him, and I was like, oh, what do you do? And he's like, oh, I'm an opera singer. And I was like, oh, wow, that's really cool. And you just do this in your part-time? And I was like, oh, so, what kinds of places do you perform? And he's like, oh, I perform in this, it's just a small little place. It's called the Mariinsky Theater. Okay, so if you know anything about St. Petersburg, like Mariinsky Theater is like the equivalent of the Bolshoi Theater, but in St. Petersburg. So it's like a big deal. It's like the Met, right? So of course it was like, he's being careful to say anything громко сказано, like saying it loudly. So he was really downplaying the fact that he's a professional opera singer at like one of the best theaters in Russia. Now, granted, that was very sad that he gets paid so little that he has to drive a taxi on the side. But that's Russia for you, full of amazing talent and people earning very little money. So, громко сказано. That's why, even though people on a regular basis compliment my Russian, you're never going to hear me on here being like, oh, my Russian's amazing. I'm so good. I'm blah, blah, blah. Like, yes, that's what other people say, but it is very uncomfortable to say that about myself because I feel forever like I am not as good as I want to be. And plus, I know that in Russian culture, it is очень некрасиво to, brag about things, especially your talents and abilities. And then number 15, most important thing that I've learned and I am reminded of on a very daily basis is that this is a lifelong pursuit. And I love that. Yes, it can be discouraging, but it's actually amazing. Do you know that that's what keeps your brain agile and young, is being exposed to new information on a regular basis? So what better way to keep my brain hopping at all times than to learn a new language or to try and learn something new about Russian every single day. And I hope you will too. Leave in the comments below what have been your light bulb moments. Was there anything in today's video that was like, oh, the clouds parting and you suddenly realized something? And let me know if there's any of these 15 epiphanies that you would like me to elaborate on. So again, that is all for today. Remember that I have a Patreon page and all sorts of fun benefits for people who want to support me over on Patreon. And I do offer private tutoring. You can find out more about that by emailing me at collegerussian@gmail.com. And again, thank you to all of you. До свидания.